Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank all the speakers who accurately explained why we are here today, and thanks to all of you for coming to find out what we are planning to do. Let me tell you a few simple things. First of all, the Knowledge Portal is not a container for patient data, but has the aim of facilitating the collection, exchange, and distribution of knowledge, basically following the methods that all communities use today to exchange views, whether they are scientific companies or institutional bodies. It is an open tool, developed by a private company that also has a social responsibility to try and support the growth of the sector in which it operates. What problems are we trying to address? The complexities of sharing clinical data, collecting information in order to represent it, compare it, transform it into knowledge, and then into good practices. The theme of the evolution of science and instruments, which are then translated into clinical trials, a key element of evolution, as they confirm or deny certain assumptions. Today, we have not only problems, but also great opportunities, such as collecting billions of data from many sources, from within hospitals, or from general medicine, and from home care tools, such as wearable devices, which are fashionable, especially in the USA, and fall under the theme of patient engagement and of interaction with the patient, an incredibly powerful source of information and data. This is all very nice. In the field of computer science, we have come a long way in terms of technology, and, thanks to international standards, in the last 10 to 15 years, interoperability technology has made it possible for us to transfer messages containing information. Today, we can move data from one hospital to another and make it available, but we still have a major problem. We open the envelope and look inside it, but we often don't understand what we are reading. In order to make this tool available, we have drawn inspiration from these 5 paradigms. One of them is a container that we all know well: Wikipedia, an open container of knowledge that has replaced the Encyclopedia Britannica. We all used to have encyclopedias at home, but today, culture and information are digital. What's the limit? The huge limit is that this is a really strict, highly controlled environment. So we can't afford to add or not reduce clinical risk. Therefore, information can't be collected and distributed unless it is analysed very carefully. Social networking has thrown us into the world based on sharing, but unfortunately it is too anarchic an environment, and therefore doesn't allow us to apply the strict rules of validation and certification of scientific knowledge. However, we have also used things that are typical of the world of computer science, such as balloting, so that communities working in clinical practice can share and express their opinions and turn this expression of judgment into objects that can be used with simple tools. We also have the elements that are closest to the world of computer science, which in order to be successful must be easy and inexpensive. Open source tools. One of the key values is that this is a tool for the entire scientific community, not a Daedalus tool. A knowledge container tool must contain knowledge, but we will see this in detail later on. The dynamics with which communities are created, scientific and professional communities are managed, and this information is transferred, are not modified by the Knowledge Portal. The dynamics of what happens today when joining a scientific society or working as a hospital operator don't change. I must now introduce some important elements because, naturally, we must start with semantics. We must start with definitions. Let's start with a simple problem that may seem trivial. We need to exchange information on body temperature, which is something really basic. Is there anything more simple than exchanging information, such as how high is your fever? This commonplace statement actually implies a semantic and taxonomic complexity that doesn't allow such clinical information to be easily exchanged between two physicians who work in different wards, contexts, with different configurations and using different measuring instruments. In the field of medicine, information must be absolute. We can't build an object that creates clinical risk. We must be as certain as possible that the information we are exchanging is accurate. Let's define what clinical concepts are. We can turn them into archetypes from a logical point of view. Look at how many variations there are in clinical temperature. There are 24 characteristics to exactly determine temperature. This means that there is an extremely high level of underlying complexity, and it is no coincidence that until now, we have not been able to build a simple tool system of this kind. The other major problem is that the whole world collects, codifies, and enters the clinical information obtained from its tools, calling them as they are used to. We don't have a universal clinical language, and we won't have one over the next few years. We need to be really practical and solve this problem by creating reference mechanisms to understand. Within our organization, our colleague in a hospital located 1 million kilometers away, who uses another language to refer to another coding system. The portal reconnects these non-understandings, and this prepares us to enter the key phase, which is to share knowledge. Sharing knowledge means dealing with clinical scenarios. What is a clinical scenario? It is the combination of the following factors. I analyze a suspicion. I analyze it in a female. I analyze it in a certain context, and all this gives rise to clinical use cases. This is a very practical example to explain that dealing with a case of suspected myocardial infarction at home, rather than in the emergency room or in an intensive care unit, means having completely different tools at our disposal for diagnosis and treatment. Therefore, the clinical use case is the basic element of clinical competence that I need to model and must be able to exchange. The theme of comorbidities makes things even more complicated, since it is not enough to imagine treating a patient with that clinical scenario, as I also need to bring a series of highly complex combination elements into the equation. But to do what? What is the point of managing a clinical scenario and therefore a clinical use case? The best practice the community voted for is that when I am dealing with a case of suspected myocardial infarction, I must collect this specific information accurately and must represent it exactly in this way. Everything must be turned into a prescription. Today, we believe that any word that comes out of a physician's mouth is a prescription, and this must be all modeled and placed in that context. This is a very practical example of what it is like to interact with the tool. Through the portal, I can access my tools, such as medical records and EMR, and import them in real time, so that when I have to deal with that clinical use case, I know which is the best practice that the community now considers useful, valid, and certified at any stage. If I have this kind of tool at my disposal, I can also populate the clinical portal with my behavior and then add it as I work. Naturally, one of the easiest, most obvious elements we can all benefit from is that of participating in clinical trials. Since the vast majority of the information contained in clinical trial collection forms is also contained in our operational tools in medical records. So if I have been able to model a clinical use case that is particularly consistent with the trial, I will be able to export this data in a simple way, avoiding double entries and all related errors. This interaction prepares us for what I will now try to tell you. It is a process we have undertaken using our products. This portal, however, is open to any competitor. We have no intention of monopolizing it, and this is exactly how it works. There are 3 of our products. One of them is French, and the other 2 are Italian. We have modeled malaria, dengue fever, and meningitis by interacting with the Italian Society for Infectious and Tropical Diseases. Everyone calls these concepts, which should be collected as they usually do. The system simply creates a link between how I call it in my organization and compares it to the coding system that I choose myself. This system can be in Italian, French, or Chinese. It is completely irrelevant. This whole object hugely trivializes referring to clinical concepts that are universally the same, although highly complex. These 3 products refer to single clinical concepts. We all speak our own language. We all recognize it as we see fit. We all will continue to see the information exchanged with our colleague in our own language, and we are not changing anyone's way of working. Everyone must continue to work exactly as they have worked up to now, since we must try to make this change less complicated, invasive, and stressful as possible. This is a collaboration with the University of Rouen, which has done an excellent job. For example, there are problems with coding because the very structures that code use different coding systems. Some use Loing, others use SNOMED. So even if we are very strict with our organization, we have great difficulty exchanging information. All this must help us build what we have called the clinical use scenario. What I must collect, represent, and prescribe, with a step-by-step approach that lies between compulsory, recommended, and useful. I can therefore control a knowledge-gathering phenomenon involving all community members. This object is extremely simple to model, and we can't even imagine that a facility, such as a hospital, has to fill this tool with competence itself. But if every single facility decides to enter a community in order to model even a single clinical scenario and clinical use case, this competence, much like Wikipedia, will expand really quickly and easily. This is meant to make everything really simple and completely natural, and we firmly believe that we can't change the way physicians work. We don't want to do this because they already have so many things to do. Therefore, if we provide them with a simple tool that is easy to use without changing their way of working, the knowledge portal will finally allow us to achieve exactly what we want, to gather and exchange information while making sure that we all operate with the same routines, with the same mechanism that allows me to determine what we mentioned earlier, namely body temperature. Of course, all this allows me to build what are generically called order sets that can be subject to voting or that can be accessed when needed. They are contained in the portal with a versioning mechanism as well, because knowledge evolves. A trial shows that I have to administer something different. I understand that I must treat a woman differently from a man. So all this expands knowledge. When we talk about order set, we mean any activity that is carried out for that patient. Therefore, not only the therapeutic prescription, but the action, the nursing activities, the same activity that patients must do. All this can be easily modeled. Here, you can see that the examples are consistent with malaria, dengue fever, and meningitis. So this work is being done now in Italy, and we are extending it to France, in order to share it internationally as quickly as possible. Just imagine the effort that we have made in this country to create electronic health records. We open the envelopes containing electronic health records and are unable to use their content. We have billions and billions of data, most of which can't be used. This mechanism is the result of the many mistakes we have made. We had to do things and redo them, take them apart and reassemble them. We have been working on this object for many years, and we now feel ready to make this announcement and tell this story so that today we can embark on a journey. What should emerge from this is that an international object, an object that we can make available to anyone who wants to use it. This is a practical example based on our new product. But, as I just said, this object is made available to anyone who wants to use it. We now have a friend who is Bruce Wayne, our Batman. A patient who arrives with a suspected infectious disease, and I have no idea what it might be. And perhaps I don't even have much experience, since we can't possibly assume that the physician remembers 27,000 pathologies and all their nuances by heart. This part is a representation generated by the portal, that is, the way of representing the data dynamically self-configures with respect to the combination of the suspicion and of the stage, and the information I'm going to ask for is strictly related to that clinical use case. This high level of dynamism is now possible thanks to the knowledge incorporated in an element that is external to the transactional element, which is my usual medical record that we no longer call this way, but clinical information system, due to the level of sophistication it has achieved. All these elements are configured since an international, national, clinical and departmental community has decided that this is the right way to behave and, at the very least, standardizes the level of behavior in each ward. It is a component we call coherence maps. The other element that the system allows me to accept are elements of proximity in terms of data representing a specific possible pathology, and the system also helps me manage comorbidities or suspicions I may have. This is the most critical element. We'd previously talked about how many people die from diagnostic errors, and this tool is at the very least a great object of augmented intelligence. I am not yet particularly convinced of how much artificial intelligence in this current state of data incomprehensibility can actually generate a value, since data must be absolutely precise. However, today, we can provide physicians with extremely powerful tools, such as this one, to help them make their decision. So it is always the physician who decides to say, for example, "I don't believe it is dengue fever," "I don't believe it is malaria," and automatically combine the things I must collect or see, what kind of prescription I must apply, to make sure I don't forget something. Well, even being able to make the basic statement, "I haven't forgotten anything," is what was said correctly this morning. A medical error is not the physician's error. It is the organization's error. It is due to a lack of tools. And there will always be human error. But if we provide physicians with tools with such potential, we can be sure that everything can be improved and done with great simplicity. Now there is a key step I'd like you to see. The portal also contains operational culture. This is an example in which malaria is treated. By now the suspicion has become certainty. And all these elements also derive from the clinical portal. So the culture collected helps me manage the disease consistently according to best practices. I have not forgotten anything. I have not left out any information. And, above all, I am not running the risk of having thousands of pieces of clinical information that create huge noise when one is operating, since we then risk having too much data, which also leads to clinical risk. Here you can see that this is a powerful prescribing system, CPOE. This world is radically changing. We no longer have order entry or medical records. We have completely different systems, but the value is that all this knowledge is not inside the system, but inside a large container of knowledge. Another feature of this portal, mainly in the diagnostic world, is ordinary practice. Take an anatomopathologist, for example. At some point during the microscope analysis, he picked up an atlas because he couldn't remember everything. Take a look at this fitting example. This dashboard is dynamically built on the basis of suspicion. Even an anatomopathologist needs to collect clinical information, and collaboration in making diagnosis has now become prevalent. Especially in the case of highly complex diseases, collaboration is not theory. Today, an oncology patient is treated by multidisciplinary teams, and to do his work, the anatomopathologist needs tools which, without going into detail on sophisticated artificial intelligence, also trivially make it possible to compare information that derives from pathological anatomy practice with information that derives from radiology and with the patient's clinical information, which is data collected in the medical record. The more information we give to the pathologist, the lower the risk of making mistakes. But when I am making a diagnosis, I can access the knowledge portal, which becomes a large container of images and slides that have been tagged and labeled as related to that specific pathology, which perhaps a community has validated and then said, "When you find a slide with these characteristics, this is adenocarcinoma." Therefore, I can mix different sources, collect them in a clinical case, and sterilize it as a source of knowledge that matures, grows, and evolves every day. With this combination of methods, when the pathologist has seen everything, the image, the ultrasound, where the sample was taken, which, as you well know, has different values within a millimeter of where the tumor is. The suspicion, I have not made a diagnosis yet, opens up a series of related images that the community has labeled as representative of that object or specific pathology. I can compare, superimpose, take, or share it to obtain a second opinion, or share it in dashboards for teleconsultation or virtual meetings that we now consider one of the basic elements of the new clinical information system. There is no clinical support tool that doesn't allow sharing, multidisciplinary meetings and dashboards, where physicians can stay in the ward 5 floors above or 100 kilometers away without sharing this information. The tagging system must be extremely simple, and this allows me to enrich the knowledge database while I operate. The other important element is the speed with which the portal is populated. I can populate it on the basis of structured moments of knowledge definition, or I can enrich it and then submit it to voting when this information is generated, whether they are data or images. This information becomes knowledge. Today we talk about business intelligence and AI. But since we don't understand the data, we can't represent anything. We created this example in 1 month. Since we started working with infectious disease specialists, we are currently collecting data from 3 centers. And look at what we can achieve. This is a powerful business intelligence tool that no longer has the problem of having to say, "Let me see what this data means." Because when we are representing information, we must have the absolute certainty that we are entering the right information. The first immediate derivative is the actual implementation of population health management, where we hold conferences around the world. But we don't actually succeed in applying it. Or, if we do apply it, it is only through tremendous economic, operational, and organizational effort. All this becomes natively easy to achieve. All this is part of the overall features of the object that is ready and available. Let's get to the last part, the trickiest one. If you appreciated the simplicity of this tool, it needs to become established, and this involves communities, creating communities. We have a clear idea of who communities are. They are and will be the heart. Today's communities are the ward, hospital, region, Ministry of Health, scientific society, a school. Are we all in one or more communities? And how do we manage them? In a very strict way. Advisory boards open up a clinical scenario, a clinical case. Therefore, advisory boards are widely and absolutely recognized and can decide to adopt the push mechanism. That is, the advisory board invites subjects to participate. Some may even decide not to join, but I invite them. Knowledge must be qualified, must be certain. But it can also be pull. I can open up to the market, to the world, and say, "Do you want to participate?" And the dynamic of acceptance is typical of any organization. The advisory board will decide if I am accepted by 2, 3, 4, or 5 members, and I can become part of the community, rather than not being considered eligible if 3 members say no with a red flag. The other key element is the results that the community produces. Who can benefit from it? If it is closed, only the members of the community, which is typical in the institutional world, can benefit from it. A scientific society can say, I only give this availability to my scientific society members. Or I can decide that the community is open, even if external parties don't participate in creating knowledge, but I make knowledge usable, available to everyone. The portal contains a whole set of tools that are typical to this kind of object: chat, blog, and forum. So somewhere you can discuss things, a calendar of events, a bibliography. It must be a large tool to collect this information. As you can see, this is an example where I can decide to belong to the community of my scientific society, but at the same time, I am also part of the community of the Lombardy region, which tells me that I have to treat a certain disease in a specific way or strictly follow national procedures when it comes to infectious diseases. At the very least, this object makes my life easier. It helps me remember what I must collect, when, and what I must do. There is a whole range of dynamics that allow me to use the portal depending on where I am. What's starting today? Basically, we're setting out on a walk. Not in the desert, I hope. A moment in which we wanted to tell you that we feel ready to be operational in a very short time. We would like to raise your interest and gain your support. We have set ourselves a goal. This is the content. The various shells of the portal. If you want to receive more information, we spent the month of October collecting info, criticism, and suggestions. We can't consider this tool to be finished and perfected in all its parts, but we are certain that now we have a highly advanced tool that allows us to embark on this journey. We met by chance with the members of the board of the Italian Society for Infectious and Tropical Diseases. And Professor Tervio said, but we would like to have a national medical record so that we can all do things the same way. They have done a great job pushing themselves to do praiseworthy work. But it is such a pity that these gentlemen work in organizational settings where there is a medical file A, B, or C, which makes it extremely complex. In 1 month, we have built the integration systems with the folders, remapping the concepts as they are called in Ancona, in Florence, in France. In 1 month, we have produced the dashboard you have seen, which is not fake, but true. This is real data from information we collected. So we can dramatically shorten this process. Of course, it will be used in a wide range of ways, but we will each have variations of the tool. We certainly expect it to work with people whose job is to produce knowledge. Today, in roundtable panels, there are also people who sell knowledge, produce it, and sell it. But how do I put it into practice in my daily work? That is somewhere else, and this is in my medical file, and they don't communicate. Therefore, the portal has great value as it serves as a bridge between these tools, speeding up and simplifying these technical activities to a huge extent. By the end of the month, we would like to raise interest, and then, in the next 2 to 3 months, we will activate beta testing, with the aim of being truly operational from the beginning of next year. This requires a tremendous effort. Even if, as Umberto said, we are the largest European company. But this isn't enough to justify an investment of this magnitude. which is not only an economic investment, but also an intellectual investment and an investment in communication. If you think our work is praiseworthy, thank you. Please use it and spread the word.